As a new report, as Sam has just suggested, from Axios, reveals that Cuba has acquired more than 300 military drones and could be preparing to use them against the United States. White House reporter Mark Caputo cites classified intelligence shared with Axios, detailing how Cuba has started discussing plans to possibly use the drones to attack the U.S. base at Guantanamo Bay, U.S. military vessels, and Key West in Florida, which sits just 90 miles north of Havana. And Mark joins us now. Great reporting, Mark. We know that John Ratcliffe was down in Cuba, the director of the CIA, just last week. Is this part of the reason that he was down there, to say to the Cubans, don't even try this? Because clearly the Cubans, as is every other small country in the world, is studying asymmetric warfare at the moment.
Yeah, my understanding, the answer to that is yes. One of the sources he spoke to for this story said that this was specifically raised by Ratcliffe when he met with his Cuban counterparts down in Havana. It was also sort of a show of force for him to go down there. There's two ways to look at why the United States is coming out with this information now. And notably, Cuba is not denying it has the drones. It's just denying it would use them in an offensive way. It's saying it would only react to an aggression that is suggesting they would use them defensively. As the United States either wants to put more pressure on the regime in Havana to come up with a deal and tell them, hey, we know what you have here, and so let's make a deal. Or B, this could be a pretext for war, for an invasion, as Sam had just mentioned. What's pretty clear is that though there have been talks, the talks haven't been that fruitful, and the United States just keeps piling pressure on pressure on pressure on the regime in Havana. Not only did they happen to mention to us this report and this information about Cuba's national drone program and drone technology. On Wednesday, there are plans to formally indict Raul Castro for the 1996 shootdown of two aid planes from a group called Brothers to the Rescue that are based in Miami. And then there are various sanctions that are being imposed in an increasingly difficult way on Havana that are starting to penalize private companies, foreign companies, that are doing business there and taking more and more money out of the already broke country. They barely have any fuel. In some streets in Havana, the only lights that are now on are from trash fires that people are burning. It's a very difficult situation, and it looks like it's going to get worse.
Mark, this is David Ignatius in Washington. I want to ask you two things. Those of us who are old enough to remember 1962 think that the introduction of any kind of new offensive weapons into Cuba is potentially very dangerous. Cuban Missile Crisis stuff. So first question is whether you get the sense that it's being taken that seriously by the Trump administration. Second question, this talk about indicting Raul Castro obviously reminds us of Venezuela. And the essentially the kidnapping of the then Venezuelan President Maduro. Do you see that as being in the early stages of actually being planned?
As for the first part, the Cuban Missile Crisis comparison, these aren't nuclear weapons. The United States, the sources that we spoke to said that though this is a concern, and it's a concern that there are IRGC, Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps members from Iran who are in Havana, who do advise the regime that they're there and they don't want them there with these drones, that it's just not as much of a threat, say, as having a nuclear weapon. As for the second part, the indictment of Castro does certainly have these echoes to the operation in Venezuela. The difference that I think people need to understand between Venezuela and Cuba from the United States perspective is that Cuba is much less of a sort of a cohesive nation where if you remove the dictator, you can have people you can do business there with. In this case, Castro is a de facto dictator. He sort of says yes and no to various ideas to move the nation forward. But it's ruled sort of by a Politburo. And there are just not people there who want to make a deal with the United States. They've been in a Cold War with the U.S. since 1959, and so far there are no indications that they're going to move forward. Now, there are plans, obviously, to invade Cuba. There are plans not to invade Cuba. This is what the Pentagon does, and Trump hasn't made that decision. I'm being told, at least in the short term, that until the situation in Iran gets resolved, we're not going to see action in Cuba. But I ask, well, what does that mean, the situation in Iran get resolved, and what's the timeline? There's no answer for that. And, you know, it's Trump. Tomorrow he could suddenly decide, hey, let's invade Cuba, and it's going to happen. Or he could decide not to do anything, and therefore it won't.
You know, it's Trump, which seems to be the kind of motto of this second administration. The new report's available online now at Axios. White House reporter for Axios, Mark Caputo, thank you so much for joining us.